Good morning, church family. At least I want to call you family. I know I haven't been here for very long, but you've heard my name a couple times, a couple different ways, in a bunch of different settings. Maybe the first time you saw me was eating a bug. They didn't tell me that was part of my job description, but here we are. We're faithful anyways, despite that. But I'm Aaron, and I'm the summer intern here. So that means I get to do a lot of fun things. Eating a bug maybe sometimes is one of them, but little things like going and getting the coffee every day, or taking the lunch order and picking that up, or when Mike throws me in the youth room, it's like, fix everything in there. That's not true. It was a joke. He doesn't actually do that. I am helping work on the youth room, though. We're giving it kind of this breath of fresh air, some new paint, taking down some stuff, all those things. And what can I say? The youth picks a great color. Bright pink in a youth room is just, that's something. But they picked it, so they get to enjoy it, I guess, and Mike gets to enjoy it over the school semester when they're here. But being the intern, I really do get to do a lot of fun things that are really life-giving and why I'm here. And one of them was I got to go to Called with those lovely people that were up here on stage getting to talk about it. And I could talk all live-long day about it because, well, one, it's my alma mater, which is really weird to say. Life's moved so fast, it hasn't quite felt like I graduated this past May from MACU. That's what we call Mid-America Christian University for short. It's the letters of it. But I love it there, just the people, the community that you build and things like that. But Called in and of itself was just this really, there's really only one way to say it, of like, it was the community that Jesus and like God is calling us to live out. Was this community of young people that have a call on their heart to serve Him, whether it be in vocational ministry, whether that's what they're thinking right now, or maybe they're just, I really have this burden. I know I need to do something, so I'm going to explore this, but maybe later in life, they're the doctor that they give you the really bad news, but then they say, can I pray for you maybe? Or they just have this smile, they have this hope for you about it. You're like, where are you getting that from? And they're like, I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. So all day, I could talk about it all day. Like Liz said, it was, God did a lot of things in my heart too. There was a lot of things said that I was like, dang, I thought I was just supposed to be the driver and like help some stuff. But all right, God, I hear you. So if you really want to hear like the stories, what it meant, how impactful it was, go find the two girls that went, because that's who it was for. It was for that group, that audience. So they're going to have the real life stories, I guess, of how much it meant to them. And if Claire isn't wanting to talk very much, just get her a Diet Coke with some vanilla in it, and she'll talk until the Lord comes back. And that might be a while, so buckle up, strap in. It's really fun. I got to know them a lot, and they're some awesome people, and I know that you'll love to get to know them too. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. So let's dive into what God has for us today. And we're going to be reading from Matthew 5, chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. So they'll be on the screen if you want to follow along there. If you have a Bible, your phone, if you have the Dead Sea Scrolls, that'd be impressive. Whatever you want to read or follow along with. I'm going to be reading from the CSB, the Christian Standard Version Bible. So it might be a little bit different than what you have, but it'll be pretty close. So, again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, you must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord. But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it is God's throne, or by the earth, because it is His footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great King. Do not swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black. But let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than that is from the evil one. So let's bow. I want to pray over that and pray for this message. Lord, we're here today, humbly coming before you. Soften the hearts that might be a little hardened, that might just be here this morning just to be here, because they know they probably should be, if something's going on, whatever it might be. Soften those hearts. Open our minds so that whatever is said, they'll be able to understand it, that they'll walk away with a greater understanding of what your word is and what it means and how it can affect their life. Let this help us abide in you. Help us to learn that you are the well that never runs dry. Hide me behind the cross. I don't want to be seen. I want this to be all about you, whatever you have to say. I pray for the rest of our day, our week, as we go along with what this message has for us. It's in your holy name. Amen. So I'd like to think I was a pretty good kid when I was growing up. I raised in church, I was a pastor's grandkid. My dad was a pastor's kid. My mom, her parents were the very she could wear shorts and things like that, but they were almost over that line of you can't wear shorts. That's not good for you to do. My dad was on the other side of the line. So when I grew up, it's Dad, it's hot outside and I don't want to wear pants. He's like, I didn't get to wear shorts. Cry about it. I don't know. So, but I was a pretty good kid for all of that. Never really did anything crazy. But for some reason, just every now and then, I, in my genius, very high intellect, 8-year-old brain was so at some point realized, I can lie, and they're never going to know. How could that possibly go wrong? For the parents in there, you're probably just man, kids are dumb. I love them, but kids are dumb. We're always going to find out. It's just how it happens. And so I wasn't a pathological liar. It was just every now and then when I was I really don't want to do that. For some reason, my brain was you don't have to, but you can say that you did. And that was mind-blowing to me. Not condoning that. Don't hear me say that. But anyways, so when I was growing up, the best way to say it, I guess, is a skin condition. It was something on my arms and my face that I just had all these bumps. They didn't hurt, and it wasn't a breakout or reaction or anything like that, but they were just there. And so we went to the dermatologist and stuff, and they're just put on this lotion, it'll help keep it under control. And I've kind of grown out of it a little bit, so I don't really need to do that anymore. But as a kid, if I didn't put this lotion on after my shower, it was really bad. You could see my arms and face and be yeah, you need to do something about that. But I hated lotion as a kid. So sunscreening was also a terrible experience for my mother. She's you're going to get sunburnt. You are not very tan. You are a white child. You're going to burn. And I was but I don't want sunscreen. So it was always a fight. So I did everything in my power to not do that. And like I said, just at some point, my brain was I can just tell her I did it, but not actually do it. And so that's what I was doing. I'd get out of the shower, and because I'm a child, she's did you wash your hair? Yeah. Did you soap up? Yeah. Did you put your lotion on? Mm-hmm. But I didn't. And so, I don't know, at some point, moms get suspicious. Moms know everything. Somehow, I still don't get it. I think that's one of the greatest mysteries of life. How do moms know everything? They just do. But eventually she got suspicious and was I'm going to test him. And so I think it was a couple years ago, I was telling my mom about this. She was I forgot I did that. And I was I didn't. I remembered for the rest of my life, so much so that now I'm that was a good one, Mom. I'm putting that in my playbook. But basically, it was this container of lotion, and she had put cotton balls in it and then closed it. Now, because I was not putting this lotion on, I had no idea those cotton balls were in there. So one day, like clockwork, I get out, hair, body, lotion. Yep. Go to my room, wait. She's are you sure you put your lotion on? I was oh, that's never a good sign when they have to ask twice. I got to double down, though. I can't back out now. And I'm yeah, I did. And she goes, okay. And gets up and just walks to the bathroom. And at this point, I'm oh, this is looking bad. This is looking real bad for me right now. And she gets it, and just like parents do, I'm giving you one last chance. Did you put your lotion on? Yeah. Triple down. I would never recommend tripling down in any situation, especially when you're lying. And she goes, Really. And unscrewed it, and when I tell you my stomach dropped, it was in China. I was like, there's no way. Like, I can't do anything to try to lie and get myself out of this because there's the cotton balls in it. And she was like, yeah, I put those in there a while ago. I know you haven't been doing it. Poof, grounded. And I was like, dang, all right. So that one instance, single-handedly, I was like, maybe I should just never do that ever again. So that was really influential on my, younger days of getting caught in the act of lying and then never doing it again. That was a joke. I was a child. I still did it. That's what it does. But now I'm like, that was a good lesson, Mom. Thanks for that. But so kind of a funny story, and you might be like, why is he on stage? I just like to see him eat a bug and leave. Where's Justin? I promise it all has a point. It all will hopefully make sense if I do it well. But it was a funny story kind of about when we give our word, it matters. There's a reason we say things and should probably follow through with it. So as we begin to kind of consider that and that fact of how our faith should be driving us to a life where our word can be trusted without oaths, without having to, swear on the Bible and, do an oath of office type thing like we see the president do, there's some things that we can observe from this text, from the surrounding context and different things that will help us understand that. So if you've been here the past couple weeks, Justin has done a really great job at breaking down this Sermon on the Mount, is what Matthew chapter 5 is Jesus is teaching on a mountain, if you could have guessed that, to a really big crowd as he does. But this was actually right after being tempted and calling the first disciples. So really, this was one of Jesus's first kind of official teachings, big moments. So keep that in mind as we're talking about all the things, and kind of let this whole sermon series we're doing of okay, this was the first things he decided to teach on. Why is that important? Just keep that in mind as we're doing all of this studying that we're doing. But the Sermon on the Mount is probably one of Jesus's most prolific teachings. People know that, the Beatitudes, all the things. It's really famous. It's one of his most popular ones. And it really just sets up the rest of his ministry because these backwards teachings, as Justin has called it, I pulled in one of my first days here and saw that on the sign. I was like, man, what church am I coming to? The backwards teaching of Christ. And we're deconstructing things. I think I might not be here for that long, but he's done a really great job of painting a picture and explaining what that actually means in this setting. But these backwards teachings are at the core of what Jesus' ministry was. The message or this theme that Jesus is weaving through all kind of come back to this. And obviously he came to live a perfect life, die on the cross, save us from our sins, all those things. But he was weaving this message into that he came to fulfill the Old Testament by teaching us how to live in the spirit of those laws and not the letter that had been twisted through the generations from the Pharisees and the teaching and things like that. And that's especially evident in this specific part of the Sermon on the Mount that we're going to be talking about. And I do want to clarify throughout the whole thing, the Bible, it says oaths and swearing and all the things. So promises, oaths, swearing, I'll kind of use all those interchangeably. So if I say oath in one sentence and then literally in the next say promise, it's referring all to kind of the same thing. So don't get tripped up on that. But just different translations say different things. So whether your Bible said vows or the oaths or promise or something similar, they all essentially mean pretty much the same thing. And it's probably exactly what you think it is too. A promise is not super complicated, but it's just to swear or pledge to, for, or by something or someone. It's kind of a mouthful, but it just means it is. So the Jews had, a great amount of respect for the Old Testament. You had the Pharisees and the scribes, these religious leaders, that was kind of their whole shtick, is the scribes were constantly taking notes and copying down the law because at that point they had scrolls and the big old tablets and stuff, and so they didn't have a laptop or a Bible they could just flip open to. So their whole thing was kind of, okay, I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it to this. And because of that, I don't know if you've ever had to write a lot in school or things like that, but when you write the same thing over and over and over, you start to memorize it and understand it a little bit better. And then the Pharisees were kind of more of what you would think in this position, the teaching role. They would be up on the equivalent of like Sunday, and they're teaching, they're reading from the law and explaining it to the people. That way they could understand it. And that's great. And you would think that for the average person that wasn't a religious leader, that wasn't one of those that had had all this schooling and stuff, that they would be the ones you'd look to, like, okay, I'm going to do what that person's doing because they know more than me and they're teaching me. That's going to be great. But the issue is that the respect that these religious leaders had, it was kind of coming from a wrong place. It was coming for the respect for the law was coming from a place that was often based in the tradition. What they had been taught, what they had been told was the way to interpret it, what it meant, than an actual correct understanding of what God intended for these laws to be. So we start to kind of see why Jesus would bring this up in his Sermon on the Mount. All these really important things that he talks about lust, divorce, hating a brother or sister, being angry, all the things we've talked about or will talk about. This kind of gets thrown in there of like, don't make promises. And you kind of just stop and you're like, okay, well, I was tracking with all the other ones. That one doesn't really make sense. But you begin to realize because the Ten Commandments don't take the Lord's name in vain. We all are like, okay, we know that one. And that was the same kind of idea of the Pharisees too. They're like, we know that one. We're not going to do that. We will not take the Lord's name in vain. But they had twisted the law to where they weren't taking the Lord's name in vain, but they would just take everything else, like make oaths by everything else. So they'd find a loophole. That's basically what it was. It was a loophole to not feel bad for breaking the law by not technically, well, I didn't technically swear by God or use God's name in vain. It's like, okay, but their intention was still the same. They were still doing it for the same reasons, in the same purposes. They just substituted a word. So Jesus, he wanted to correct this flawed understanding of the law that the religious leaders had twisted slowly over time. And like I said, specifically the one about taking the Lord's name in vain and what that one was supposed to mean originally. So like making a promise, it's something like, I promise I'll take the trash out, Mom. I promise that everything I just told you is true. Which obviously, if you're an 8-year-old that doesn't like to put lotion on, that wasn't true. I wasn't putting the lotion on. I was lying. Or swearing, like if you hear in like movies or TV shows or whatever, it's like, I swear on my mother's grave, I don't know anything else. Things like that. That was kind of what this meant of taking an oath. Like I said, technically, they weren't using the Lord's name in vain, but they were saying everything else, and it still meant the same thing. It was just so they wouldn't feel bad for breaking the commandment. So at one point, Jesus tells the crowd, you have heard it said, and that's a reference to the Old Testament passages where it's talking about, hey, don't take the Lord's name in vain, all the commandments, all the law that these people, the Israelites, would have known. This would be the equivalent of like if you've grown up in Sunday school and I reference something about like Moses, hitting the rock and water coming out, or Moses leading them through the desert for 40 years because they weren't faithful. All of those things, you would understand when I'm referencing that because you grew up in church and you grew up hearing those stories, or at least a lot of us did. So it's the same thing for them. They grew up listening to all this law being taught to them. So they understood when he said, you have heard it said, they're like, oh, I know what he's talking about. I know the passages he's talking about. But yet, even then, they still had to get twisted, even though they knew what it was. Part of Jesus' ministry was to explain the law. Obviously, he came to heal, to save, to live a perfect life, all the things, like I said. But a large part of his ministry was just to come in and be just a crazy, radical difference to what the Israelites had been following, what they had gotten twisted up in. He wanted to explain the law and explain how to live in a way that they were focusing on the spirit of what it meant, what God intended, rather than the legalistic letter of the law that the Pharisees and scribes and religious leaders were kind of putting everybody into a box of. He wanted to explain it so it would turn to the original thing that God intended it for it to be. So we see that Jesus, he was just wanting to help the Jewish people understand the true intent of the law instead of living out these laws, these things that are good, but living them out through technicalities, which kind of reminds me of a story from high school where I was living in a technicality. So for those of you that don't know me, I would love to get to know all of you. Come up and introduce yourself. I'd love to. Let's go get lunch and talk about Called if you want to, whatever it might be. But music is a huge part of my life. Writing this, I actually began to kind of think about how big of an influence it was, and was like, man, that's a lot more than I realized. Like, it really formed me into the person who I am today. But in high school, I was a part of the percussion section of band. So that meant during football games, I was out there on the field. I was marching with the really big one on your chest that went boom, boom, boom. That was the one I marched. And so I would do that. We'd do the shows. I loved it. But then in the spring semester, I was still in band, and it was basically all the instruments that you were out on the field. You kind of just shifted them into more professional things. Like some of the instruments were different, whatever. So percussion, that meant we had a lot more things to play and do rather than just hit drum with stick in time. There was different things. But it's kind of still the same concept of like practice music, go perform somewhere at a contest. Practice music, perform at a contest, that type of thing. Now for marching band, you have your dress stuff, the hat with the big feather on top called a plume that you always tell the freshmen is backwards, but there's not really a backwards. That was really funny to do, and then the freshmen were smarter than I was, and it wasn't funny anymore. I was just like, man, I was that dumb? All right. But anyways, so the specific dress for that was black pants and then like long sleeve button-up shirt, and then like dress for girls or whatever the equivalent of a dress is for girls that's not a dress. Can't say that I really have much experience in that, considering, But anyways, black pants was all it said. I was like, okay, cool. I had a pair of, I'm not my finest days, everybody. Forgive me for it, but black skinny jeans. That was my jam, I guess. I don't know why. I remember my mom trying to tell me, and I was just like, yeah, you don't know what you know, old woman. Nah, I really should have listened to her. Moms know. They know, so listen to your moms. But black skinny jeans, and then I would wear the button-up shirt. Technically fine. And at first, I just didn't know. I was like, okay, this works fine. I'm wearing black pants. I'm standing behind drums in the very back. You can't really even see, and they look like slacks, so it's fine. But after, I think it was a concert we did for our hometown in our auditorium, the director comes up and he's like, hey, great job, blah, 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 blah. Next time, can you wear black slacks, though? And, me and my really just humble and responsible high school self was like, these are black pants. That's what you said to wear. He's like, right, but everybody is wearing, like you're supposed to be wearing black slacks. But you didn't say I had to, though. You just said black pants. And so then it was just kind of constant tug-of-war battle. Every single competition, every single time, he was like, really? Yeah. It was not, like I said, not my brightest days, not my greatest moments. But technically speaking, the syllabus or the rules just said black pants. I was wearing black pants, and because I was stubborn as a mule, I was like, I'm not going to change it because this is technically right. And eventually, after that year ended, I think that was like, you make to-do lists of like, okay, what do I need to do different for next year? How can I make the band better? Things like that. I like to imagine at home. He had, the big whiteboard with all the things of like, okay, this and then I need to do this, and just like really bright, huge red letters, change syllabus to say black slacks. I hate that kid. It was great. We love each other. Every now and then I'll show back up to things when I go back home, and he's like, hey, how are you? All the stuff. But yeah, so that next year when it said that, I was like, okay, got black slacks and I wore them. And I couldn't tell if he was like really relieved or if he wanted to hit me in the head with a drum, because he was like, really, if it's that easy, you could have just done that the first time. I'm like, yeah, but technically you didn't say I had to, so I wasn't going to. And that is why I think sometimes I was the worst ever, because I was stubborn and like, well, I'm right and you can't convince me otherwise. I'm still kind of stubborn, but I've grown, I think, through that, hopefully. I'm not that same way. But it was a lot more like stuffy and not as fun to be in band when I was constantly riding that line of like, I'm not technically breaking the rules, but I'm like right there. Like when a sibling is like, I'm not touching you, and it's like, right, but you basically are, so I'm going to punch you now. My brother and I totally didn't ever have that happen. But it was a lot more enjoyable when I was really living the spirit of what he wanted. He wanted us all to match and wear black slacks and the dress shirt, so you all looked really nice and professional as we were playing these pieces of music. But instead, I wanted to live in the technicality of, but you didn't say I technically had to, so I'm going to find this loophole and live that way. It's very similar to how Jesus wanted us to focus on the spirit of the law, what God really intended them to be, and not the letter that the Pharisees are following and teaching. So what does that mean for us? Not all of us were in band and had cat fights with our band director, so how does that apply? What can that mean for you? For many of us, we get caught up in what we call legalism, that letter of the law, of I have to do this, I have to do this, all the do's and don'ts and boxes you got to check as a Christian. I got to go to church, I got to read my Bible, I got to pray, I got to lift my hands when I'm worshiping. You get caught in this legalism. I do too. I mean, I'm not saying I'm not guilty of it, but a lot of times that's what happens. We focus on the letter, just like I was focused on the jeans being black pants, but not technically the spirit of it needed to be black slacks. So what if, when Jesus died, you remember how that veil tore in the temple and then fell? Or at least I picture it falling if a veil tears. Anyways, that veil that tore, what if we actually let that tear and fall? Because every time we're clinging to this technicality, to the letter of the law, we're just desperately hanging on to that, which I don't know if you know, that veil was humongous and very heavy, which just paints this illustration even better. But when we're focused on that legalism, we're clinging to this curtain, this veil, trying to hold it together on what we can do. If you know anything about what Jesus is about, what Christianity is about, it's not what we can do. It's what God can do for us and through us and with us and all those things. So when we're focused on that letter, we're trying to hold that veil together because we want to be able to do something, because we think this is the right way. Let go. I encourage you, let go of it. The great thing of the spirit of the law, sometimes it's hard to figure out what it is, how to live it, all those things. We have the Holy Spirit that's inside of us as Christians. And he wants to help you. He wants to help live out that intent of the law, not the letter. So what is God maybe asking you to let go of? Is there a part of your life that maybe you've kind of been stuck on that letter, whether it be out of stubbornness or maybe you just didn't know and you just need to spend more time in the Word and figure out, I didn't know that was how it was supposed to be read. Where's the Spirit trying to guide you to? Take time this week and ask God to help you let go of that veil, because it's hard to let go of things sometimes. Let go and let God reveal what he wants to do in and through your life. Life is meant to be lived with God in his Spirit. And sometimes we're humans. Like I said, we might let go, but when he turns around, we might run back to the veil and be like, but I just want to hold it one more time. Are there patterns in your life maybe that you see? You'll go through ebbs and flows or in specific situations and contexts that you're like, I'm fine, but then I cling to the letter. Maybe there's something you need to let go of. But our next point is kind of all of it's obviously going along with promises and things like that, but it's kind of taking that key thing we were talking about was the intent. The intent was still to live in the technicality of the law, even though they were finding that loophole. So our next one is we need to promise with purpose. So the idea of oaths and promises, it's been around for a long time. I mean, the very beginning, when God flooded the earth, well, I guess not, that's not technically the very beginning, but when God flooded the earth and Noah floated around in a big old boat for a while, afterwards God was like, I'm going to make a promise, I'm going to make a covenant with you into the earth. I will never flood it completely again. And what was the sign of that? It was the rainbow. That was the sign of his promise to mankind. So every time you see a rainbow, it can remind you, thanks, God. I can't swim very well anyways. So obviously, God has made a promise at some point. And then later on in Matthew, this gospel that we're reading through, when Jesus is in the final days of his life, when he's being put on trial, all the things leading up to him dying on the cross, he goes to court and then testifies, talks to the court under oath. So God's done it. Jesus has done it. Okay, so there's obviously times when people have done it. And Paul, one of the greatest missionaries and one of the strongest Christian leaders in the Bible that everybody is always like, oh, Paul, I want to be like Paul. I want to learn from Paul the things. He also did it. In his second letter to Corinth, 2 Corinthians, he pretty much just says, like, God as my witness, and then, like, talks. And so, again, you begin to question, you're like, okay, but they're doing it, but why? How is the Pharisees wrong? And it all just kind of comes back to that same thing that we've talked about, intent. Because when the religious leaders, they would make their promises and do the things and fast and pray, it was all about me, me, me. I'm going to stand here. You're going to see me. I'm going to be on my knees praying in public and with the black sackcloth and different things. And I'm fasting. And I'm going to make sure you know that I'm fasting. You're going to eat something. I'm like, man, I'm really hungry. But I can't because I'm fasting for the Lord right now. Like they were making everything very showboaty about them. And that was the issue, is the intent was not to say, hey, I'm going to make this commitment, I'm going to make this promise, I'm going to make this oath that what I say is true, or that it'll be held as true, that I'll follow through because God is good and would follow through with his word. It was all about them. They just wanted people, by Jerusalem, I'm going to do that, or like however they would make their oath. They just wanted it to be, you should look at me because I'm really cool and I'm going to follow through with all of my promises. But realistically, it was all about them. It was never about God. So they weren't technically using God's name in vain, but they were just using different things to try to convince people that they were doing God's will. But it was all about them. When Paul made his oath, the difference was in his decision and like how he went about it. His words and actions were glorifying to God. He wasn't just saying that about anything and everything and doing it all of the time. It was when he was like letting you know, hey, this thing that I said, God has told me. It is from God. You know, those types of things that you go, okay, he's being very true and very real. Promises aren't one of those things that you should just use in ordinary conversation. Because when you begin to think about it, what power do we have as like the collateral to show that what we have says any weight? So in these verses you see, there's a lot of different things he talks about. By heaven, by the throne, because it is his throne, by the earth, Jerusalem, your own head, all of those things. And it's essentially just a list of kind of what any great speaker does, is give you examples of things so you understand it. Because one way sometimes won't reach everybody. Two ways sometimes won't reach everybody. So give them a bunch of examples and then it makes more sense. But so let's talk about some of them. Can't swear in your own head. All right, well, I mean, it's us. Why can't we do that? Well, I'm not going to be, if I could, I would stand here and say, God, I'm going to do this thing on because I can turn my own hair white or black. I can make myself not be going bald at 22. Thanks, Dad, for that one. I can't do that. I would love to. I would do it right now if I could, probably, which is not right and incredibly vain of me. But that's kind of the whole point, is you can't do that. It's like, all right, well, have you guys ever heard the classic, cross my heart, hope to die? That was something that we said as kids a lot. I never really did, because if anything like that came out of my mouth, my mom was like, you see this wooden spoon? Meet your butt, and it would smack me. I was a spankings child. I don't know what that means. Maybe you're like, yeah, that makes sense. You would be. I don't know. I don't know what that means. But that whole, it's not your life. Did you give yourself the life? Who created you? Who created everything and is in everything? God. Creator of all things and therefore in all things. So that's why it's that's why it's important to be intentional about your promises. Because every promise you make is a direct reflection of God and who He is. Because especially as a Christian, as a child of God, if I come over here and promise somebody that I'm going to do something and then just blatantly turn my back on it, maybe I don't mean to, maybe I do, and I don't follow through with that promise, what does that say about Christians? What does that say about God? Does that mean I can't trust Him? Well, you're supposed to be chasing after God and be like God. And if you're just going to break your promises and never follow through with them, why would I want to follow a God that apparently that's what He's like, because you're supposed to be a reflection? That's why at the very end of this, the kind of confusing, don't even make oaths at all. It's like, okay, so we can't make promises? Jesus is basically just saying, don't make them at all, because it would be better for you to just not do that than run the risk of dishonoring God. That's why it's important to be intentional. He's not saying that we can't. He's saying that sometimes it's better to just not do a thing, not get close to it, than get really close to it or do it sometimes, but just try to do it really faithfully, because we're going to mess up. We're human. We're going to fail. So some people, He's like, yeah, just don't even mess with it. And one of those people, I don't know if you guys have ever seen The Office, Michael Scott. He might have been one of those people that Jesus was like, yeah, you should maybe just never use the word promise again. In one of the episodes, I probably won't do it justice, but the whole theme of the show or whatever is, it's this documentary type style. Cameras are following people around, and it's following the everyday lives of employees at a paper company called Dunder Mifflin in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Very interesting place, I'm sure. Very interesting job. Well, they do a great job at making it really funny and really entertaining, and just, incredibly awkward, to where you just want to I didn't make the noise. That's really upsetting. You just want to poke your eyes out, because you're like, man, that's embarrassing. I could never do that. That would hurt me so bad. And one of those episodes, I was really impressed. I'm really terrible at remembering names of episodes and plots and things like that. Some people, if you meet them and they love a show so much, you could be like, Season 2, Episode 3, and they give you the title and the rundown of the entire thing. I'm like, how did you do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. But this one is a little bit easier. It's called Scott's Tots, and man, what a mess up on his part. So the whole thing is sometime later, earlier in Michael's life. You don't see it in the show, but it's referenced, and you see flashback. Michael goes to visit some elementary schoolers, some third graders, as a local businessman or whatever, and just really kind of has a heart for them. And it's man, I really don't want them to fall victim to the system, because they were in a lower income neighborhood, all those things. He's like, I just want to do what's best for them and help them. And he really cared for them. So in his blinded love for them, whatever you might say, he told these third graders, so pretty young, hey, if you guys can graduate high school, I'll pay for your college. Now, as a recent college grad, God was very, very blessing to me, and I don't have any student debt, so that's really awesome. But there were several times where I was like, oh, those student loans look painful. I don't want to have to pay for those. And he came through every time and provided. But I know how expensive 4 years can be. And MacU, shameless plug, comparatively to some other schools, is really not that expensive, and you get a great community with it. But even then, 4 years of all of that, I'm like, that's a lot of money. Now multiply that by like 15. That's a lot of money. That's a ton of money. I'll never have that much money, and that's okay, I think. No, I'm kidding. It is. My brother's going to be a welder, so I'm just going to play with all of his fancy toys when he makes a lot of money, and that's going to be great for me. But basically, at some point, Michael is like talking because it comes up in the office, and one of the people is like, Michael, why would you promise that? That's horrible. Why would you do that to them? And he's like, well, I thought by 30 I'd be a millionaire. And then I wasn't. So then I thought, well, okay, maybe by 40 I'll be a millionaire. And he said, I had less money at 40 than I did at 30. So maybe 50. Didn't happen for him. But he's been putting off this meeting for a long time because these kids have finally graduated high school, or they're about to graduate. And so he goes down to the school to see him. And it's this whole big thing, elaborate. They perform this original song and dance routine for him because they were just so thankful. They had a couple of the teachers or like the principal or something basically just get up in front of him and say, we just love you and thank you so much for this. We can't tell you the amount of times some politician has come in or something and told us, hey, I'm going to help fix your school, so I'm going to lobby for all your votes. I'm going to fix your school, make it nicer and things like that. And then have done the thing of like, okay, cool, anyways, and then not done it. But you're not like that. You are not going to do it. And he's just sitting in the front row like, oh, I'm about to do that. I'm about to do that same thing. And a couple of the students come up. Like one of the students is even like, there's a couple times I almost got into like the drug world of like using and selling and all the things. But I remembered your promise and it pushed me through and I didn't do it. And you've inspired me, and I know my dreams are going to come true, and I'm going to be the next Obama. And Michael just goes, oh, no, and like is just crumbling in this school desk. And eventually they're like, okay, Michael, come up, say some words. Basically tell us, I'm going to pay. And he goes, well, education is very important. However, you can see all the students, they're a little like, well, what is he talking about? He's kind of a quirky guy, so I guess this makes sense. But he goes on this spiel of trying to beat around the bush and then eventually tells them this harsh truth after he had got all these cuts from them telling the dreams and inspirations and things like that. He was basically getting up in front of them and jumping into a pool of like rubbing alcohol and lemon juice with all of these paper cuts all over his body. Just how incredibly painful and terrible this was. And he tells them, yeah, I can't actually pay for your college. And obviously they're upset, distraught, confused, all the things. And he tries to make up the moment, and he's like, but online classes are as viable of a way to get an education and much cheaper as well. And to do that, you need a laptop. And so the students are like, okay, well, maybe a laptop's not terrible. Okay, whatever. And he goes, and to use a laptop, you need a battery, and then opens a bag of just giant batteries, and the class erupts again, and they're all incredibly upset and frustrated. And so that's kind of the whole thing. That whole episode is a lot about that. And me, I get really bad secondhand embarrassment. I also get really bad firsthand embarrassment, so it's really just kind of a double whammy. It's not great sometimes for me out here, but it's okay. I like to laugh at myself a lot, and that's part of growth. But I don't think I could have done it. I would have ran, so at least he went and told them. But it was all because he had this poorly thought through promise. It maybe was for great reasons, for a great purpose. He wanted to take these third graders that statistically really didn't have a chance to go anywhere in their life, and he wanted to help them and bring them to this point in their life where they were successful and awesome and amazing, and he couldn't do it. But he made the promise, and he couldn't follow through with it. So just imagine how damaged those kids' trust is, how much they've probably already been hurt because they had grown up in a bad place. Now, anytime anybody's going to promise them something, why in the world would they ever trust them? So it's a really funny story, and I encourage you, watch the episode, because it's a lot funnier when you watch it. Facial expressions, what they say, how they say, all the things. You really just get a feeling of like, wow, you dug yourself a deep one there, didn't you, Michael Scott? So it's a funny story about how maybe we should think through our promises before we actually give our word. But what does that have to do with the verses? That's a wildly different thing than the Bible. We went from the Bible to Michael Scott, I'm lying as an 8-year-old, all the things. Like I said, I promise they all make sense. Hopefully you're tracking a little bit. But I do want to clarify, this isn't me saying you can't make promises or make oaths, or I don't know who uses that word. I don't. But obviously we've talked about there are situations and times where you do. You have to make them, or you do, or whatever. It's like, it happens. It's okay. But all of that, kind of that harsh line that Jesus is drawing and that I was trying to draw, is just to help form that distinction between being intentional about your promises and then just making promises willy-nilly and not ever thinking them through and just, well, I feel like I should promise this in the moment, so I'm going to do it, but not really having any weight to it, not having any way to actually fulfill that promise and live through it. So now that there is that line, we see that line in the sand, hopefully, start to examine your own life. Put your own life on that line. What parts of your life fall on either side of the line? Some people are really great about when they promise you something, you know it's going to happen. When they tell you something, you know they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that thing happens. And that's great. Those are great people. Sometimes people struggle a little bit more with when they say something, you're like, you might. And that's okay. We're human. Everybody's got their things. But examine your life. Where do you fall? Because chances are there's probably parts of your life that you're really good about, making promises and holding up on them and things like that. But then there might be other times, other parts of your life, you're like, man, I really struggle there. But remember, it's not about this letter. It's not this legalistic letter, these rules that we have to follow. It's about the spirit that we were talking about in the first point. So don't get in this mindset of like, okay, I can't say promise, I can't say swear, I can't make an oath, I can't do all these things. Try to be in the mindset of the intentionality behind what you're saying. Is it true? Do you really mean it? Can you mean it? Can you make it happen? What if you became more intentional about what you said? Even the little things, even the things you're like, oh, that doesn't matter. What if? How could that change your life? Maybe it's not this huge radical life change where you make this one small thing and then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, my life's completely different. But that's kind of what a Christian walk is, right? It's the daily little small changes that make you more like Jesus. So focus on that. What small things can you change for you personally? Because I know for me, a lot of times I'll be sitting out there where you are and listen to a pastor preach and all of those things and start thinking of all these different things. What can I change? What can I do? And a lot of times it's often more, what would be a good change to make for someone, but not necessarily me. It doesn't apply to me like super directly. So find a change that's going to be for you personally, not something that you think, yeah, that'd be a good change for him to do. Like maybe never wear black skinny jeans again. I haven't. So I made that change. But find something that will impact your life, not something that will impact somebody else's. And then our third and final point, I know I've been talking a lot, but we're wrapping up. We're getting close, I promise, is that we see Jesus is trying to teach us that our word should be enough on its own. So kind of the culmination of these first two of, hey, you've kind of got this twisted. Let's live in the spirit of what God is trying to say in these laws. And this, hey, live in intentionality, promise with purpose, taking these two things and combining them to, when you do both of those things, your word should be enough. When I tell you something, I shouldn't have to swear on like my grandma's grave or something, or whatever it might be. I shouldn't have to do that to convince you what I'm saying is true. So I did some research on what the word yes in this verse means. And no, it's not because I didn't know what yes meant. I'm smarter than that, I promise. Maybe not much smarter, but I at least know what that word means. But it's because the Old Testament and New Testament were not originally in English. that might be like crazy revolutionary to somebody. I know before I started doing a lot of schooling, I didn't realize all this stuff. It was kind of just one of those like America bubble things. I'm like, everything's in English. No, not really. It was not in English originally. It actually took a long time for it to be in English. A lot of times it was in Latin, all the things. But originally it was Hebrew and Greek were the two. So in that, when you translate things, I don't know if anybody can speak other languages in here. When you translate something from another word to English, it doesn't always overlap perfectly. There's kind of some holes in it sometimes of like, well, I'm saying this and I'm trying to mean this, but in English, I can't quite find something that really just portrays it and shows you what I'm trying to say completely. So a lot of times, not to be cool or flex, when pastors are like, this word in Greek or Hebrew, they're not trying to just show, yeah, I went to school and I know stuff, because chances are they're probably don't know a ton. They're just looking it up. I know that's me at least, and a lot of conversations I've had, they're like, yeah, I don't know, man. I Googled it. I took Greek, but I can't read it. And so that's no diss to a pastor that says that, but not about us. That's basically what I'm trying to say. Not about us when we're like, yeah, this is what this word means. But it's that different translations sometimes give you a deeper and more complete understanding and context of what that word means when the person is saying it. So here, the word yes, it means probably, you can probably guess it, but a primary particle of strong affirmation or confirmation. Was that not your guess? It wasn't mine either, so that's okay, we're in the same boat. We really both don't know much, but it's just a fancy way of saying yes means that you're confirming what you said was true, or confirming, when I say yes to this thing, that's going to happen. Don't overthink it. Yes means yes. But whenever you Google a word or find a definition for it, if you're using like Webster? I blanked on that really hard. That showed how young I was, I guess. But whatever, a lot of times it'll give you synonyms, extra words that like, this word could kind of probably fit in the sentence if you're trying to find a way to spruce it up and not just say the same word over and over and over. Here's another word to use. Well, one of the words for this, for the word yes, was truth. So when you think about it in the context, you can kind of start to replace it and see. So originally, it probably said something a lot more like, but let your yes mean truth. And when you think of it like that, it starts to tie everything in a lot more, because you're like, okay, yeah, my word needs to be my word. I need to be saying the right things and following through with it. Okay, cool. But when you think of it, my word needs to be the truth, not the objective truth of whatever I say will be true and is true, but like when I say something, it needs to be the truth. When I tell you I'm 22 years old from McAllister, Oklahoma, that needs to be the truth. That seems silly, but I could stand here and tell you I'm from wherever, and you, if you didn't know me before, you'd be like, okay, cool. And you'll come up and talk to me like, hey, what was growing up in Idaho like? I'm like, yeah, I didn't. I lied to you straight up on the stage. And you'd be like, oh, why did you do that? Dumb, but that's kind of the point. Your yes needs to be your truth. It needs to be truth. It needs to be what you mean. Not kind of what you meant or a little bit of the truth. It needs to be that. Which is why this verse does such a great job of simplifying this entire section of Scripture. All these verses that we read, it really kind of just comes down to this one point, this one thing. That your words should be enough, like hold enough weight, that when you say yes to something, there's no doubt that you could mean anything else. That when I tell Mike, yes, I'll be there for that lunch, he doesn't have to go, but is he? He is. Yeah, but what if he didn't? When I tell Mike I'm going to be there, my yes needs to be, he's going to be there 100%, so much so that if I start to be late, Mike is going to go, okay, where is he? Something's wrong because he said he would be here. And then he would be like, hey, where are you at? And then that would give me the opportunity, like, I'm running late, which is something I do often. I really struggle with that. I need to be better at it, but it needs to be so truthful that Mike has no place to doubt. He has no reason to worry. It's when you begin to make those unnecessary oaths, and emphasizing unnecessary, it's when you make those that the trustworthiness of our word is shaken. when people start to wonder, well, but what if? What if he's not going to be at that lunch? Is when I just promise Mike everything and anything. Yeah, Mike, I promise I'll do such and such. And he's like, okay, that's not going to happen. So then when I say, yeah, Mike, I promise I'm going to be at that lunch, he goes, all right, but your promises hold no weight because you do it for everything. That's why it's so important to be intentional and not just say, I promise about everything. I hope you never have to, but if you ever find yourself in court and needing to testify, and where'd it go? Come back here. Oh. Solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Sorry, I'm normally really good at flowing. If I forget something, just move on to something back and come back. But that one specifically, I was a backup bailiff in mock trial, which is just the person that says that pretty much in courtrooms, and fumbled it. I mean, just did that pretty much exact thing. Just stood there and was like, I actually said, oh crap, in front of like active current judges of Oklahoma. It was really terrible. And they were like, wow, we're never bringing this guy back ever for any of the mock trial things we did, because I wasn't a part of it. They were just like, we need a backup. Ours canceled last minute. You want to miss school? I was like, yeah, I do. I don't want to be at school. What do you mean? But anyway, so I fumbled that. So I was like, no, I have to do myself justice. And I really didn't even do it that time. And I practiced a lot. So go me. But taking that oath in the courtroom is okay, because people aren't always truthful and honest. And a lot of times when you're putting your hand on that Bible or promising that you're going to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, there's consequences. Because if they find out I'm not telling the truth, they're going to just be like, all right, well, I don't know. It doesn't matter if you were really guilty or anything like that. Before, we found out you're lying about where you were that night, so now we're instantly more suspicious. Now you've put yourself on the bad side of the jury. So it's okay to do that. And like I said earlier, even in Matthew 26, later on in Jesus' ministry, he was speaking under oath in a court. It's very similar. But that's just one example. There are others and different things. But it's because we live in a fallen and broken world where people are not always good and honest. I don't know, there's probably people that you've met in your life that you're like, yeah, I would not trust them to do really a whole lot. And that's unfortunate. That's really sad. I want everybody to be good and honest and trustful. That I can just walk, like when I'm a parent, and just walk outside and see somebody random, be like, hey, can you watch my kid for me? And then leave. But the reality is there's a lot of good people. And I think there's more good people in this world than there are bad. But the reality is that is a gamble. Because what if I do that and that person's like, cool, anyways. And then just like leaves with my kid. Not everybody is going to be good and honest. So that's why oaths are sometimes needed in very specific contexts and with intentionality. And the reality is not everything is this really big official, like I'm putting my hand on the Bible and whichever hand it is and swearing that I'm going to do my best to lead the country like our presidents do and things like that. Sometimes it's when somebody's asking you, hey, we're doing this at this time or whatever, make sure you're there. I'm like, okay, cool, I will be there at 6 o'clock. And then every single time, which is almost impressive to be consistently late by like 15 minutes every single time if you're doing that. Not a good impressive, but if you're late 15 minutes every single time, it doesn't matter. They're going to start telling you, hey, we actually changed it to 6:40 or 5:45. And they're going, oh, cool, okay. And then you're going to get there 15 minutes later, and they're like, great, now we can start. This is originally when we're supposed to start. It's little things like that is what most of our life is going to consist of, is when you tell somebody a little thing and you're not following through with your word on it. And sometimes those little instances that we often let slide because they're like, it's little. It's like, oh, that's just a little white lie, it's fine. It's still a lie. It still holds the same weight. But those instances are sometimes more damaging to your trust, the trustworthiness of your word than the other things of just outright breaking a promise. Because those are the daily things that are going to happen more often. We tend to only think of the big things, like if you were renting from a landlord and you just were really behind on money. You're like, hey, I promise I'll get the money to you by the end of the week. And then the end of the week comes and you're just like, yeah, I never told you I was going to get you the money by the end of the week. I don't have it. I'll do it next week. And like you just keep doing that. like breaking that promise, that's what we think of. We think of big things like that, which, kind of side note, caveat, oftentimes that's how we think of sin in general, is just like, well, the really bad sins are the really big ones that affect a lot of people or do a lot of things or are just really bad. It's true. I mean, sin is sin. It's bad. But, I mean, killing a guy and lying to your mom about putting lotion on, in God's eyes, are both sin. I kind of like to think of it as like a bar graph, but instead of, you seeing all the graphs like this and things like that, you're looking at it from above. Now, to a degree, there is depth and stuff. All analogies break down if you look at them too long. But kind of this simple of like, okay, but you're looking at the bar graph, and they're all technically just kind of like this. Now, maybe you see some closer, whatever, but the whole point is God sees sin as sin. Like I said, side note, caveat, but that's really what we think about when we think about keeping our word, is the big things. But a lot of the things, more often than we think, are those small ways. And so all that is really just to say that we should strive to be at the point where we don't even need to make those promises anymore, that people will just trust what we say is what we mean and we're going to do it. I don't know if you ever had a friend like this in high school or now or whenever, but I'm sure you've heard of somebody that had one or have had one or whatever it might be. But I had a friend in high school that I loved him to death. Great guy. We did a lot of music stuff together, actually, in the youth group, all of those things. But he was one of those that you're like, wow, you sure tell a lot of stories, and they're really funny, but I'm not ever quite sure how true any of them are. He was one that you learned to kind of carry around a shaker of salt with you, and you're like, all right, how much do I need for this story? Handful, okay, only a little bit. I'm just taking the bottle off and taking the whole thing of salt, because sometimes he would tell tall tales like that. One of my favorite ones that he did was this a story that he came home one day. He was driving his truck, and he was kind of driving down his road, and he saw something on his house. He's like, what is that on my house? Like, what is that? And he got closer, and he gets out of his truck, and lo and behold, it is his brother on the roof sunbathing. Less than fully clothed, we'll say. And we were like, that can't be real. There's no way. But also, like, knowing his brother and stuff, we kind of went, yeah, that kind of checks out. He might do that. So it was really funny. And we were like, okay, take a few grains of salt, whatever. But then over the years, it eventually turned into, he was like, yeah, I'd come home all the time, and I just see my brother up there, not clothed. And we're like, okay, you didn't say that the first time. And maybe he did it once or twice, but like every time? I don't know about that. So the repercussions of that was when he was trying to tell us stories about anything or just tell us anything, we were immediately skeptical. Like, okay, well, maybe he's just trying to get a reaction out of us, or trying to make us think it was this whole big thing. So we kind of started to doubt a little bit. I love him to death, and I trust him. But it always made me, wonder a little bit. Does your word make people wonder? So moving away from the sunbathing brothers and high levels of cholesterol with all the salt or sodium, whatever that might be, I'm realizing now that might not be the correct word for that. Don't know. I'm young. Hopefully don't have to deal with that. But let's tie it all back to the verse, the scripture, what it means for us. I love a good story as much as the next person. And sometimes we end up exaggerating a little bit in our enthusiasm. And that's okay. That happens. But the catch is when everything we say starts to become this fisherman's tale. My fish was this big, this big, this big. And that's where we get to the point of people wonder the trustworthiness of our word. So like I said, what about your life? Do you make people wonder? Are there parts of your life where people have to just wonder if what you're saying, if they can take it at face value? It's probably the most introspective part of this whole message, because if we're being honest, we probably don't struggle with the big promises, like getting the money to the landlord. It's probably more of I'll be there at this time, and then we never are. So then people are like, yep, they're going to be late. I can't really tell them that it's going to be this time, so they have to plan around you. Most of us, that's probably what we struggle with, is the small things. And like I said, I'm preaching to the choir on the showing up late one. I'm really not good at that. I'm trying to be better about it, but everybody's got their thing. So really take some time and think about your life and where you might be struggling to let your yes be a yes, like a complete yes be the truth. How could you let God work through you this week, not only to reveal what you struggle with, but also how to change it? If you, through all of this rambling, you're like, yeah, I know what I need to change. God's really just laid that on my heart. I know. Great. Your question then becomes, what goals can you set right now, and what accountability do you have to succeed, to be better, to make that life change? So I know I talked a lot, and like I said, maybe none of that made sense, and that's okay. Hopefully it made sense to somebody. But as we're closing and the worship team comes back up for one final song, I want you to take this time and be really intentional about it. One of my favorite words of this whole thing, intentional. Not only this time as we're worshiping, but also throughout the week when you have your quiet time and you're spending time with the Lord and things like that. Let God reveal to you the spots of your life that you need to apply this to, whatever lesson it might be. If you struggle more with focusing on the spirit rather than the letter, you get caught up in the legalism, let him soften your heart to see the beauty that the word is pointing to a relationship with God and not a set of rules and regulations. Or maybe God's calling you to promise with more purpose, to be more intentional about when and why you make promises to people. And this last point that we talked about, letting your yes be a yes, no matter how small that yes might be. I do challenge you to really truly sit and do some self-reflection, and sometimes that's uncomfortable. Self-reflection hurts because you start to see things about yourself you want to not see, but God called us not to be comfortable, actually. So take your time and sit in the uncomfortability, because that's where you grow a lot, is in that. When you give someone your yes, is it truly a yes? And it all really boils down and comes to this one thing. If you don't hear anything else, this is what it is. Jesus was teaching that we should be such a person of our word that you don't even need to take oaths, that your word is what you mean. Is that true of your life? If not, how can you make it true of your life? So bow with me. Lord, we come today and just bare ourselves to you, open and laid bare, as the scripture says, that you reveal to us what needs to change, what big things, what little things, whatever it might be. Help us to be intentional and diligent this week about listening for you and to you about what they need to do with this, what they can take and apply and make a daily change out of so they can chase after you. I thank you for this time and we got to spend it together. I pray for just the rest of our day that we go out and have a great time and start to live in this truth that you're teaching us and all the truths that we've learned throughout this series. Reveal it to us, Lord, and soften our hearts to allow it to change us. In your name I pray. Amen.